There have been requests that I go through this table and just discuss my ratings and kind of give a little bit more explanation as to why I put them in this sort of a system. I did a video on this, I want to say about a month or so ago, but it's been a while and I'm sure that that video might have gotten lost. And it was more an explanation as to why I was switching the verbiage over instead of saying like, tier list. I'm calling this a rating or like grade or score kind of a system. Tier list, I don't want to give that impression, even though I know it's going to be inevitable with something like this. This isn't a tier list. I don't think that this game quite fits into that sort of a categorization, I guess you could say. This is a system where I'm just giving these a grade. And by grade, what I mean is the general health, how I think that that subclass is going to perform across all levels of play. How useful do I think its features are? What kind of mechanical benefits is it getting you? And, X, Y, Z things. So first off, one of the things that I need to make sure is really apparent before we get into this is we should come to some kind of an agreement here that there is and before you really just hate on this video whenever I say this, give me a second to explain this. There is a metagame to D&D. Anytime that a game is created, anytime that a game has rules, defined character options, whatever, and whenever we figure out what those rules are and how to benefit from, using these rules or using our features, a metagame will develop. We know that something like getting force damage, right, is a very good feature because force damage has very, very little resistances or immunities across all the different monsters and all that stuff. So something that gives you force damage, we know to be a very strong feature. So if something has measurable strength, we can kind of quantify the quality or power of those different features. So that's part of why I did this rating system here. So what is kind of the metagame for D&D, right? Well, we know that there's 3 pillars of play: combat, exploration, and interaction. And the strength of your features isn't necessarily just going to be raw damage output. It's going to be how do those features allow your character to interact with the world, right? What do your character's features cause as far as impact for the game? So these are ratings that I give these classes in order to sort of give a quick estimation or a quick summary as to how I feel about the general strength of the subclass. So let's start at the very bottom and just go up. F are subclasses or character options that I feel like your character would just be straight up better with not even having on their character sheet. As in, these are classes or subclasses that are going to actually be detrimental to your character. Currently, the only one that's sitting in here is Berserker Barbarian. This is a subclass that is just kind of universally known to have some problems. Getting exhaustion is an extremely detrimental condition, and I've overheard hundreds of different YouTube comments and everything like that, talked with various designers about this rating because I know it's the one that sticks out like a big sore thumb. Berserker Barbarian, I haven't heard any argument that's made me really think that it deserves to be knocked up anywhere higher than F. This is just not really a 5e subclass. D, these are subclasses that notably fall off or are very resource expensive in that they do something like, this could be your action economy, they take up way too much of that, as is the case of vanilla Beastmaster Ranger, or you look at 4 Elements Monk, that thing just burns through key points so hard that we have seen some alternate features introduced in Tasha's to help specifically 4 Elements Monk. Enchantment Wizard is one that falls off at later levels of play because all of its features rely on something not being immune to being charmed in order for them to work. So we have a lot of monsters at later levels of play that are straight up immune to being either charmed or frightened, which means that Enchantment Wizard above about 9th level just starts to feel like it doesn't really have any subclass features. So that's the reason why that one's down here so low. Battle Ranger is completely dismissible. It just doesn't, I don't know of too many people that really think too hard about Battle Ranger. Knowledge Domain Cleric is one that gives a lot of flavor as far as like different ribbony type features, but they don't really feel like they're really helping out the cleric playstyle. And that cleric is very much a midliner, support controller, can be focused on striking or AoE damage. Cleric is super versatile, right? But Knowledge Domain is so hyper-focused on the interaction and exploration pillars of play that it unfortunately just really starts to lack whenever it comes down to combat. And, you know, D&D, like, we love the art of the game, right? We love the emotional responses and everything. We would really love for D&D to be super hyper-focused on storytelling, but combat is a part of that storytelling. And Knowledge very notably lacks in features that help it out with that, and the features that it gets as far as the interaction and exploration pillars of play just don't really justify it getting that, don't really justify it not getting anything else to help it out in combat. So that's why that one's at D. C, these are ones that I feel are entirely playable, but they might get outclassed by other options. They're just not quite stacked up to what, maybe they created a certain playstyle that they're outclassed by something within their own like base class that brings them down to where I just don't really feel like they're as effective in those different pillars of play as another option within the base class. I think a perfect example of this one is going to be Hunter Ranger, where we've seen Hunter get completely outclassed by the different subclasses that appeared in Xanthar's guide and now in Tasha's. Hunter and Beastmaster just really don't feel like Ranger subclasses anymore. Hunter is like kind of a build a play style sort of a subclass, which is interesting, and I wish that Hunter could maybe get a little bit of help in the form of an expanded spell casting. I think if they just got that, and I think what could be really interesting for Hunter is if that expanded spell casting was also something that you could choose which spell that you get at the, like, I think that Hunter could be a really, really interesting subclass, but I do think that Ranger in just the player's handbook suffered from a lack of, like, Wizards just not really knowing what they wanted to do with the class itself. So unfortunately, we're seeing those two brought down because the design concept has just shifted. You know, we're seeing much more powerful Rangers develop in later books, and whether or not you want to call that power creep or just the recognition of like a lack of power within the class itself, that's kind of up to you. I personally think that the way that Ranger subclasses have been designed here lately is the way that they need to go. I think that Ranger is much more playable now after Tasha's than it was beforehand. But then also looking at some of these other ones, like whenever I say that they're outclassed by another option, I just did a video on Fey Wanderer Ranger, and Arc Fey is a warlock that was already kind of having some problems, and then Fey Wanderer came along and had a feature that is just straight up like functioning better than one of the defining features of the Arc Fey. It's just going to be much more reliable. You're going to be able to use it way more often. And unfortunately, Arc Fey has very similar problems to the Enchantment Wizard in that they just start to really fall off later on. And like, Arc Fey is one that I think should be up for some sort of an errata. An interesting one that's in here is actually Trickery Domain, which I've heard all kinds of different opinions on that one. Trickery Domain, unfortunately, with its, its 8th level feature that deals poison damage, some of the other effects that it gets, the features are generally okay, but it is getting outclassed by so many other clerics. The fact that it did deal, and this is just vanilla Trickery Domain range or cleric, the fact that it did deal poison damage and so many creatures are immune to poison damage made Trickery just notably weaker than a lot of other clerics. Oh, but I guess I should say which ones I have in these ratings because people have complained that they can't really see the names of them. So in F, the only one I have is Berserker Barbarian. D, I have Battle Rager Barbarian, Knowledge Domain Cleric, Four Elements Monk, Beastmaster Ranger, Great Old One Warlock, and Enchantment Wizard. C, we have Nature Domain Cleric, Trickery Domain Cleric, War Domain Cleric, Arcane Archer Fighter, Sun Soul Monk, Hunter Ranger, Thief Rogue, Arc Fey Warlock, Fiend Warlock, Conjuration Wizard, and Illusion Wizard. And up here in B. So B, these are subclasses that I do think are going to actually function across all levels of play. They're going to maintain their relevance. But like, it's quite possible that maybe they just aren't keeping up in some area, right? Like with Wild Magic Barbarian, the thing that would immediately fix that subclass is scaling on some of the Wild Magic Surge options. And I think that what it just needs to get, quite honestly, is Wild Magic just needs to get a D4 added to that one feature. I just think that's way too fiddly to get it tied to a D3. But anyways, some of the other ones, Land Druid is not a bad subclass. This is a completely playable subclass. But we have seen some other options that have come up, like, Land is supposed to be the big, I am the spellcaster Druid, right? But Druid, we figured out as the midline controller, like with, healing potential and everything, Land, unfortunately, just doesn't really do a whole lot for you. Some of the features are, if we look at my color rating system, some of the features are ones that I would rate as like possibly orange or blue. And I'll get into that in a Circle of the Land video later on. But overall, like Circle of the Land Druid just kind of gets outclassed by some of the other Druids. Or looking at like Assassin, right? Assassin Rogue is entirely playable. But unfortunately, it gets some features that just feel rather ribbony in that they don't really give you a mechanical benefit and they require a fairly long amount of time to invest into getting them to pay off, right? Like, I think one is like 7 days in order for you to establish like a different identity or something like that. And that's the kind of feature that I look at and think that feels more like a background feature than an actual class feature, especially one given as late as that one is. Shadow Magic, Wild Magic. Wild Magic is there because it's completely unreliable. Wild Magic has the potential for you to take that at first level and you have a 2% chance of killing yourself outright by just exploding if you roll a 7 or 8 on that Wild Magic Surge table. That is one that I think that, like, it's super fun, right? And I get why a lot of people love Wild Magic Sorcerer, but it does need an alternate Wild Magic table. And we figured out that if a feature is just unreliable like that, we generally feel that as players, it's not as fun to play it. But we do like the Wild Magic Surge table. I don't know, maybe if there were just more benefits and you couldn't possibly just straight up kill yourself out of it, it might be a little bit different. But yeah, this is not a rating of like the fun of the subclasses, right? I'm just rating these based off of the perceived strength. So then reading the ones that I have here in B, we have Wild Magic Barbarian, Valor Bard, Death Domain Cleric, Circle of the Land Druid, Champion Fighter, Kinsei Monk, Shadow Monk, Assassin Rogue, Shadow Magic Sorcerer, Wild Magic Sorcerer, Transmutation Wizard, and then War Magic Wizard. Oh, and I will say Champion is one that I had overestimated in a video, and I plan on doing another video in the future on. Champion is one that I made a big mistake in rating it an S based off of multi-classing, right? If you go 3 levels into Fighter to grab Champion, that is such a good 3-level dip, right? You crit on a 19 or 20 is going to be amazing on any martial character whatsoever. But if I'm rating these based off of just the strength of the subclass itself, Champion Fighter falls off real hard. Champion Fighter has a real bad problem of getting some features that just don't really feel like they're giving you any mechanical benefit. So with Champion Fighter, I have brought that one down to a B if you're straight up just going Champion for all 20 levels. A, these are all subclasses that I do feel are generally fairly strong and entirely playable through all levels of play, but they may have 1 or 2 features that I do feel are pretty situational in that it's either not going to really be effective not necessarily across all levels of play, but like you could have an entire like 10 sessions that goes by where you just don't even think about that one feature that's on there, right? One of the subclasses that I will point to that I think really does define what it means to be an A class or A subclass in here is actually Ancestral Guardian Barbarian, in that they get a 3rd level feature that I think is remarkably good, right? You are able to be brought back with resurrection magic without using material components. That is super strong. But are you going to die in every session? No. I mean, hopefully not, and then in that case, it's also relying on your party composition and that you need a cleric, or really you just need any spellcaster that has access to Revivify or similar magic to bring you back. And then you have to make sure that in the case of Revivify, they get to your dead body, all that other stuff. And you're relying on that feature to be as strong as the magic that your party has access to. So there are certain party compositions in which Ancestral Guardian Barbarian, despite being one of the best taunt controllers of any Barbarian subclass, it just doesn't feel like that feature is going to really be impactful, not only across 10 sessions or whatever, but possibly across multiple levels, Like that 3rd level feature you get, it's not even going to make a difference until 5th level, where other party members are going to have access to resurrection magic. So yeah, it's kind of in a ick spot, but Ancestral Guardian Barbarian is still, it's one of my personal favorite subclasses, and I think it is strong across most levels of play with most party compositions. Or you can look in the case of Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, right? That is a remarkable subclass, but we do have Divine Soul and Clockwork Soul now, and Draconic Bloodline just does not keep up with those. Divine Soul is just one of the best healers straight up in the game. It is a completely unique playstyle for Sorcerer. And Draconic Bloodline feels like it wants to be kind of a tanky Sorcerer in a way, right? You're getting the enhancement to your armor class, and I think it's a bonus hit points. I'm trying to remember right now. But unfortunately, Draconic Bloodline just doesn't really have a really well-defined playstyle outside of you're the Sorcerer, you hit stuff hard, you hit it good, and you're big DPS. Yeah, it's just kind of a conflicted playstyle for the most part. But like I said, unfortunately, it does get outclassed by some of the other options. And the ones that I've rated so far are Ancestral Guardian Barbarian, Storm Herald Barb, Totem Warrior Barb, Zealot Barb, we got College of Glamour Bard, Arcana Domain Cleric, Dreams Shepherd and Spores Druid, Cavalier and Eldritch Knight Fighter, Oath of Glory Paladin, Monster Slayer and Swarmkeeper Ranger, Mastermind and Swashbuckler Rogue, Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, Celestial Warlock, Blade Singer, Divination, and Graviturgy Wizard. All right, S. These are all uniquely strong and playstyle defining subclass options. These are all subclasses that if we want to look at, what is the metagame quote unquote of D&D, are going to perform very well at their intended playstyle across all levels of play. Not only that, but a lot of these actually create something that may make them one of the best at X in the game completely, right? Moon Druid, we know is the most effective hit points that you can possibly get on a character option in the game. It is remarkably hard for a DM to kill a Moon Druid because that bonus action Wild Shape just means that it is such a whack-a-mole class, right? By the time that you get that, it's very easy for you to Wild Shape over into I believe it's you can get a Mammoth? I'm trying to remember. But you can get an absolutely absurd amount of hit points or effective hit points with that Druid. And a lot of the things that you can shapeshift into, right? Like elementals, you're getting so many good resistances or immunities in those different forms. Some of them have fly speeds, burrow speeds, whatever. Moon Druid is ridiculous at doing so many really remarkable things in the game. This has to be an S, and it's honestly the one that I look at and think that Moon Druid may be the reason why I would create an S+. Many people I've heard have actually banned this subclass. I personally don't really mind it, but I do know that this is like I said before, a different echelon of power compared to other subclasses. Or we can look at something like, Necromancy Wizard, which has the potential to just straight up raise up an army of 400 zombies? If you do nothing but blowing your spell slots on things like Simulacrum and Animate Dead, you can quite literally raise up an army as your one single character at later levels. Necromancy Wizard is absurdly good, and that army that you're going to wind up raising up, and sure, it's not completely realistic that you as a Necromancer are going to be able to actualize that in every single combat, but the potential is there. Some of the other ones that I think really create a really interesting playstyle that I think, define it as an S to me, looking at, we all know Hexblade is just an absurdly strong warlock overall. It seems like it wanted to be the Gish, right? Like I go in with a lot of melee weapon attacks and I'm going to be that kind of a warlock, but it wound up getting features that actually just directly enhanced base warlock spell casting in general. So it creates a playstyle that makes Hexblade just the warlock that every other warlock is going to be measured against. Divine Soul, we have support sorcerer here. Divine Soul is like one of, if not my favorite sorcerer subclass out of any of them. It has one of the biggest spell lists out of any character option in the game. Like, aside from Bard, that just gets every spell if they want it. Yeah. But like Divine Soul, having access to sorcerer and cleric spells, and cleric spells are remarkably influential on the narrative of the game. Like Divine Soul is just so good. You can more efficiently heal with that subclass than most other subclasses in the game. Again, it's creating this very unique sorcerer playstyle, and that's why it's up here in S. Like College of Lore Bard, I've said before, this is, and it's been an interesting topic of conversation. College of Lore Bard is one of, if not, like, okay, I'll say this. We know for sure College of Lore Bard is in the top 3 counterspellers in the game. So College of Lore Bard is definitely up here. It is the most bardy bard ever. College of Creation, the fact that you can completely subsidize the cost of material components of spells. Holy, what? Like the strength behind College of Creation Bard is one that like Numbers Crunch people have been looking at since it came out, and we're like, okay, what can we do with this? Like, this is a toy that was given to us that's just so insane. Beast Barbarian is one that I recently put up here into S. It is the Striker Barbarian now. We thought that was initially going to be Berserker, but like Beast Barbarian is just so good at high damage output. There's so many new feats that make Beast Barbarian just like real scary looking. You can use Tail and two-hand a weapon. Like, Great Weapon Master, it's like we looked at this and thought like, okay, how can we make the claws work really well? Well, I think the hidden strength is still just building it like any other barbarian and then getting the benefits of things like Tail, like it's there. That is a remarkable reaction to increase your armor class. So Beast Barbarian is definitely up there as just this straight up like super barb. And then me pointing out some other ones here, let's just take a look. Forged Domain. Okay, I played Forged Domain Cleric for like 3 years. This is potentially some of the highest armor class that you can get onto a character. Forged Domain Cleric is absurdly great at defining the front line. I call it like the Crusader sort of a cleric. Because like, you're going to be up in the front line. It doesn't matter that you only have a D8 for your hit die or whatever. Like, you're going to go in there and not even take damage because your armor class is going to be so absurdly high. You can put like heat metal on yourself and grapple other creatures and not take damage because you're immune to fire damage. And sure, you only start out with resistance. It comes later on. Don't worry. They have an extremely flavorful and useful Artisan's Blessing, where you can just make the object with like 100 gold pieces worth of material. Like, oh man, that comes into play for so many situations. If your allies, say you run into some rust monsters, bam, you can just straight up make them new equipment. It is so insanely good. Forged Domain is just super relevant across all levels of play. And then, I don't know, let me pick out another one in here. Okay, so Twilight Domain. Twilight Domain may possibly be, and I haven't looked at Peace quite yet, Twilight Domain may very well be the strongest cleric that we currently have in the game because it's so absolutely bloated down with features. It just gets way too much rolling out the bat, but it isn't actually doing anything that is what I feel is exploitable that would, define it as overpowered. I just think that it gets way too many features. So all the different subclasses that are in S: Beast Barbarian, Creation, Lore, and Swords Bard, Forge, Grave, Life, Light, Tempest, and Twilight Domain Cleric, Moon and Stars Druid, Battlemaster and Rune Knight Fighter, Astral Self, Drunken Master and Open Hand Monk, Oath of the Ancients and Conquest Paladin, Fey Wanderer, Horizon Walker, and Gloomstalker Ranger, Arcane Trickster, Inquisitive, and Scout Rogue, Clockwork Soul and Divine Soul Sorcerer, Hexblade Warlock, Abjuration, Chronergy, Evocation, Necromancy, and Scribe's Wizard. Oh, and by the way, Abjuration Wizard, you should go watch that video. Like, for real. I think that this is going to be the big sleeper hit of Wizard for D&D 5e. Okay, so Overpowered. Now, this is a rating that I know every time that I put a subclass up here, those videos get some flack. So these are subclasses that I don't feel like I would allow at my table in the current state that they're in. They have a mechanic in them in which I feel breaks down one of the core aspects of play. And those core aspects of play are either combat, exploration, or interaction. And we have 3 instances here of 3 subclasses that I do feel provide a mechanic in which we could consider them to be exploitable and that they do actually break down that pillar of play. Funny enough, it's actually each pillar of play right here. So let's start out with Echo Knight. Echo Knight breaks down the interaction pillar of play in that it has a resource that you can get that is an object with, sure, it doesn't have a whole lot of hit points or whatever, but that thing can interact with other objects, right? This thing can set off traps for you. That Echo is so remarkably strong in that it's probably the best scouting tool that we've seen, but Echo Knight can do this an unlimited number of times. They can just pop out this resource, right? This Echo. If they could only do it a number of times, possibly equal to like their proficiency bonus or something, it may not be that rough. But this is technically a stat block that you can create an infinite number of times with this feature, and that stat block can do different things for you. It may be considered an object for all the game purposes and everything, but it can still do many of the things that creatures can do. In that, we can now have it set off traps for you. It can go in and scout without any risk whatsoever. It's zero risk. You can send this into every single room that you're going to go into in a dungeon, and you will never, like, you might alert some guards or something like that. You would do the same thing by scouting with quite literally anything else in the game. However, every other way that you would scout in D&D is at least tied to some risk. Echo Knight, other than alerting the enemies, is a completely zero-risk scouting tool. So Echo Knight does break down that pillar of play. And I think that, like, you know, with Echo Knight, you could send this thing in. I can't remember if it's like, if the thing that touches a mimic has to be a creature. I don't know. But if it can make attacks, and you can just have this thing go up and press and push on like every single chest, then like you're never going to set off a mimic. Like it's a zero-risk class. And I think that in D&D, every character option should come with some sort of a little inherent risk. If you're just removing that, I do consider that to be breaking down a pillar of play. Way of the Long Death is one that breaks down the combat pillar of play, and I've actually brought up my kind of grading on it just so you can see where I think the 2 problematic features are. Touch of Death. Whenever you reduce a creature within 5 feet of you to 0 hit points, you gain temporary hit points equal to your Wisdom modifier plus your Monk level, minimum of 1 hit point. The fact that this is just a creature means that this could be a bug, in that you can go and just grab a bag of bugs. I call this fairly commonly on my channel the bag of rats exploit, in that you can get a very cheap creature. Like if you have a feature like this that's tied into the death of another creature, you can go find just, I don't know, a bunch of bugs. And technically this feature would work with that, rules as written. Now, like, you know, I've had some people come onto the channel and say like, well, yeah, me as a DM, I would just rule that it doesn't work that way. Right. Okay, you can do that. I'm just rating it based off of what it says here in the book. So I just don't even respond to that criticism anymore. Mastery of Death is one that I think hurts the narrative of death and really hurts combat. And in that, death is a fail state for D&D, right? We hit a point where, bam, you as a character are not able to do the things that you do. And that could be for many different things. You know, we know so many things that can cause death in D&D. So, Mastery of Death, whenever you're reduced to 0 hit points, you can expend 1 key point, no action required, to have 1 hit point instead. As a monk, you're only going to have 20 of them. They do refresh on a short rest. But what this means is that, like, in combat, here at 11th level, if you're ever reduced to 0 hit points, and let's say you've been a little bit conservative with them, this means that there's at least, I don't know, 4 or 5 times where just without an action required, you can have 1 hit point instead. I think that this is just really hurting the narrative of death. Because, like, what if suddenly, let's just say the situation is you get crushed by a pillar, right? Your body is just just disintegrate it. Technically, according to the way that this rule works, you could come up with 1 hit point instead. And I don't think that that is very good for narrative. We know that Wizards of the Coast has mostly abandoned this one because it didn't get a reprint alongside many of the other ones from Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. So Mastery of Death, like, maybe if these two were toned down, I wouldn't really mind it so much, but I do think that Way of the Long Death is overpowered and that it exploits some of the functions and mechanics of combat in a way that aren't really intended to function for the game. College of Eloquence Bard is just completely breaking the social interaction pillar of play. It also has another feature that is just way too remarkably strong compared to absolutely every other bard in the game, with that unsettling words. The fact that you can treat rolls of like a, 9 or lower as a 10 for deception and persuasion checks. Those are the two absolutely objectively most common charisma checks in the game whatsoever. And that to me is damaging that social interaction pillar of play in a way that I don't really like. And that it feels like this is a bard that's just manipulating the discussions, you know? And sure, the DM can set those or whatever. But like, I think that if a feature comes up that you as a DM are having to adjust so much of your stuff for, then I think that we should look at that as a feature that is possibly a little too good and needs some toning down. I really wouldn't mind Eloquence so much. Maybe if that was only like you treat a roll of 6 or lower as a 7, or like we look at unsettling words and maybe that was given like a little bit later in the subclass. But the fact that those are both 3rd level features and Eloquence is suffering from feature bloat, you know, 6th level, it gets more features than other bards. Like, College of Eloquence Bard is just getting way too much. It's way too strong, and I do think that it hurts the social pillar of play. So hopefully that explains this. And again, this is not a tier list. I know people have called it that, and I know I'm using Tier Maker over here. I'm trying to get away from that. This is just my, you know, my ratings that I do. This is the easy way for me to sort them. So yeah, unfortunately, people are going to look at it that way. But this is just the way that you can see all of these here listed up. It's very easy for me to sort. These at the bottom are ones that I haven't actually added in here yet or done videos on. Looking at these, you know, Samurai, Undying, Undead, Lurker in the Deep, Genie, Warlocks, Storm Sorcery, Psionic Soul, Sorcerer, Soul Knife and Phantom Rogue, Oathbreaker, Vengeance, Watcher's Crown, Redemption, Devotion Paladin, Mercy Monk, Vanaret, Cyanite and Gunslinger Fighter, Wildfire Druid, Unity, which is now Peace Domain Cleric, Whispers and Spirits Bard, Artillerist, Battlesmith, Alchemist, and Armorer Artificer. I'll go ahead and save some time on those right there. Those are all going to be S. Everything associated with Artificer is extremely strong, and we'll get into that video here later on. So anyways, that's just me explaining this. I hope it makes a little bit more sense, answered some questions that maybe any of you all have had. Feel free to leave those down in the comment section below. Yeah, let me know what you think. If you disagree with the rating, those conversations have been a lot of fun, so let's have that talk. Hey, I thank you all so much for being here. I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon sponsors for helping me keep the lights on around here. You all are absolute heroes. I hope all of you all are staying safe, staying healthy, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.